time as we can, but I want to make sure we're really thorough on what we cover. So thank you for coming. Whenever we have these kinds of events, I always kind of feel like it's my birthday party and nobody is going to come. But it's awesome to see everybody here and welcome and thank you for your interest in the district and our future of financing the district. So what's going on here? There we go. A little lag a little bit. Just a reminder of our why, right? So really what we're trying to do is solicit community input, right? I know at the last meeting, if you were here, we mentioned that we're essentially running off of a tax rate that was established in the last time, I believe, about 8 years ago. So for the past 8 years, we've essentially been operating really effectively on the same, on 2014 money. So the purpose here is to discuss and determine how we're going to finance the next 6 to 10 years, because do it this way forever. So you're here to give us input on that and help us craft that strategic plan for the next 6 to 10 years. We got a real lag here. Are you doing this? Oh, great. What the heck's thinking? I'm looking at my computer. All right. So the purpose of this committee is to figure out how we're going to pay for the general cost of doing business, because as you know, just look around. The cost of everything is going up. Gas costs more, materials cost more, labor costs more, paper costs more, and we've got to be able to keep paying for it. School safety and security, namely in the Constable initiative that we recently promoted, transportation, technology, and then of course, staff recruitment and retention. Every school district, about 70 to 80% of our budget goes directly to our staff. So we've got to be able to keep up and we've got to be able to compete with surrounding districts. Go ahead, Travis. Thank you. So take 90 seconds at your table, introduce yourselves, and present a celebration. One win, one celebration, one great thing going on in your life. At your table, 90 seconds. Go. Okay, welcome. And I apologize to our folks who are joining us online. Looks like we have about 15 stakeholders who joined us online via Zoom. And they were in groups as well, their own groups. So I will try to remember that there's more here than I see. How about a celebration? Anybody want to share? Celebration? What's going on? You just gotta have something to celebrate. Birthday, anniversary.
My youngest just turned 3.
What a great age.
Yeah.
Terrible twos, terrible twos in the rear view mirror. My wife always said our son was terrible twos, terrible threes, terrible fours.
Yes, yeah.
Anybody else?
I just got back from Sedona, Arizona.
Ah, well.
Sorry, guys.
All right,
That's what happens when you.
fun
retire.
trip, fun trip. Travis, see if anybody on the call wants to share the English.
You know, Mike can just unmute, share, if you feel like.
We were able to hear them.
Say hi.
Hi.
All right.
You can't say hi to me.
What we're all here for. It is awesome to see kids. All right,
Yes.
Travis, can we get the next slide? Thank you all for sharing. Can we get that?
That's your computer.
Is that?
So I'm being broadcast over the internet. You are up there.
All right. All right, how am I not able to advance my?
No, because now you're seeing me, so you just had to clear your.
Got it.
We got you.
Got it.
We got you.
Gosh, two screens up there at once. Okay, so what I wanted to start off tonight with is reviewing the survey that we did from the last meeting. We had about 27 respondents out of about 55 participants. So that's not bad. About half the people who participated in the meeting responded. And I'll just go right down the list. It was nine pretty quick questions. The first question was rating the confidence in the current district. And 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And as you can see, we're pretty far to the right. Pretty much got some pretty good responses on that. Confidence with the handling of school finances. Again, pretty solid to the right. Couple of 4 neutral responses. Are you clicking through that
Sorry,
fast,
yes.
Travis? Okay. He's rushing. He's rushing. Go ahead, Travis. You go. You can see transparency. We got some good marks for transparency. 22 out of the 27 responses said yes, the district is being pretty transparent with the school finances. The value of the information shared. Some folks in the open-ended responses that we had that we collected as well. Some folks felt like they maybe didn't have as much information as they needed. So hopefully after tonight, you have those questions that are still lingering in your mind answered. And if you don't get them answered, please ask those questions because Mr. Kellerman, myself, Mr. Dempsey, we're all here, as well as some other stakeholders in the district. Mr. Starr was here during the passing of the last referendum. So we are here to answer those questions. The value of the committee meeting that we had, again, was pretty good, pretty well received. Go ahead, Travis. This one's a little tricky. I need my cheater guide here. I cut and pasted these right from the Google slide, the Google form that we use. So this was the question about what are you most confident about? And you could check as many answers as you wanted. And as you can see, people were very confident about the transparency the district has shown. That's the bottom response. 20 folks who responded to the survey said they're very confident that the district is being transparent in the process, the process of crafting this financial plan. Competent leadership was rated really high, as well as the board. The actual question says the board and the district administration are looking ahead to curb further future financial challenges. So people are confident in that. Some things that people are concerned about is the next slide. What are people concerned about? And again, people could check, if you remember the survey, you took it, you could check all that you wanted. Folks are really concerned about the timing of the referendum. Do we have enough time to get this through, to get this done? Some folks, 10 respondents said, and I want to read the exact verbiage for you. The plan discussed November 30th does not generate enough revenue to support what the district will need. That was a big concern. 10 people responded. That's this one right here. Plan discussed November 30th. Does not generate enough revenue. The one that's a 0 is the plan discussed November 30th is more revenue than the district needs. Nobody said that. In fact, nobody checked that box. Okay, and then the second to the top one there, the question reads, the district board and or administration not following through on stated goals and objectives. That was a concern of 9 folks who responded to the survey. So I'm hoping tonight to quell a few of you who are concerned about that with kind of some real data. Mr. Kellerman's going to give next. Some of the open-ended questions, and I tried to summarize some of these because there were like 20 different responses, so a lot of them were very similar. So these might not be word for word, but the overwhelming responses was that we need to figure out how we're going to be able to fund teacher salaries. That was more people gave an open-ended response that was related to funding teacher salaries than anybody else. Several people said the last time we had a referendum, the things we were promised were not realized. We didn't do what we said we were going to do. But we got that. We got that list of things we said we're going to do and what was actually done and what was not done. So you'll get to see what was and wasn't done. People appreciated the openness and inclusion. Some folks said that they weren't really sure why you're here. What the heck are we doing with the committee? So hopefully we can clarify that and really nail down what our function is here. And one person said we really got to expedite the hiring of the constables. Go ahead, Travis. One person wanted us to know that we need to address diversity, equity, inclusion with this referendum. One very strong response we got was from one person, but they articulated it very well, was that this district will not support a referendum unless they know exactly, what we're trying to do, how much we're trying to collect, what it's going to pay for, and how long it's going to last. The community we need to be very clear in our campaign what exactly it is that we need this for. Time to get out in front of financial challenges. Have we done a needs assessment? We have. That's why we know those 4 things that we mentioned: recruitment and retention, transportation, technology. The 4th one, we know that those are the things that we need, and the voice of the community needs to be valued. That was mentioned several times. Okay, next. The wonders. So the last one was, this is what we need you to know. What we wonder about still is, how can we adjust to meet those rising needs and costs, right? How is it going to work? How can we offer salaries that are competitive in the district? Processes need to be clear. How was that $20 million that we got in COVID relief spent? Okay, Mr. Kellerman's going to give you a detailed list. This is exactly what we spent it on. So you see and you know how we invested those resources. How far is the board administration willing to go to do what it takes to keep the district fiscally healthy? How much do we actually need in the strategic reserve? Mr. Kellerman made a point of showing, you remember, he'll show it again tonight, that little graph that went way down and it got down there to like $1.9 million and then went wet. Right now it's about $3.6 million. That strategic reserve. How much is enough? Is enough enough? We'll hope to address that tonight. Go ahead, Mr. Mormon. Will everyone get their fair share? I'm not really sure what that meant in terms of fair share, but yes, I mean, if there's a raise in the district, everybody will get a piece of that. That's all I can imagine that somebody was asking. Will the money be spent wisely? Hopefully, through the last meeting and this meeting, we can demonstrate that we have shown some real fiscal accountability, restraint, and responsibility under the leadership of this board, and you are confident about that as we move forward. This is a really good question. How's the reassessment going to affect your taxes and this tax increase? Mr. Kellerman's going to touch on that far better than I can, but that's a good question. And this question I didn't quite understand, so hopefully Mr. Kellerman can explain this to you. Can the district be more specific about how deficits are addressed through a float system? Okay, and I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but I think Mr. Tolman's got a handle on that, so he's gonna talk to you about that. The last question asked was, based on it's okay, based on November 30th presentation regarding school finances, what should we do? And as you can see, the big chunk said run an operating referendum campaign as soon as possible to meet the needs of the district as soon as we can. The next biggest chunk was the 19.2% of the people said they didn't have enough information to decide. That's very fair, and I'm glad some people, chose that response, because we hope to close that gap tonight on that information that you might need. And then a smaller number said run the campaign at the beginning of next year. Smaller number of folks, okay? Nobody chose continue to operate under current tax revenues. Nobody chose that of the 27 respondents. All right, Mr. Warner. So the purpose of the committee, I want to try to clarify that, try to nail that down for everyone. Number one, it is an opportunity to collect input from members of the community, right? Teachers, administrators, community members. If you're here, we want to know how you feel about what we're going to do for the future of the district. Your input is important to us. Number two is help us create a strategic plan for revenues and expenses for the next 6 to 10 years, right? Because we have to do that one way or another. We can't exist at our current rate of revenues. And then once we come up with a plan, participate in that process. Okay, if the Board of Education makes the determination based on our input, because what we'll do with this committee's input is give that to the board will meet, discuss in an open session, solicit public comment, and they will decide through a board vote, will we go to referendum? But whatever their decision is, I ask that everybody that's here, we support that decision. So if they say, yes, we're going to go to referendum, then we got to get out. We got to get the vote out. We got to talk to our neighbors. We got to talk to our coworkers and our the community members that we know. And we got to go all in and do everything we can to make that work. If not, if the decision is that we're not going to go to referendum, well, we got to tighten our belts and we got to figure it out. But we ask that everybody on this part of this committee participate in that process, whatever it might be. Okay, introduce Mr. Kellerman, and he's going to again try to answer some questions on the financial side. Now we'll take a seat. Mr. K.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Lucas. Just for from the people in the room here, just by a show of hands, how many's new that was not at the last meeting, the November 30th meeting? We have a few. Okay, good. So the purpose of the next few slides is to kind of cover and get people caught up for those who are not at the November 30th meeting, and kind of give a refresher on some of the financial numbers that we have out there that we use as reference numbers. So one of the things I presented last time is a penny of our current expense to property tax equates to $55,000 in additional revenue to the district. So every time we raise your property tax rate for the current expense rate by a penny, that means the district is able to collect an additional $55,000. It's based on the total number of assessed value in the district, which is currently at about 556 million. So then we look at the current expense tax, a penny of current expense tax. What does that mean to the average assessment in the district, the average taxpayer? So when we look at the average, and when we say the average annual assessment in the district, we're talking about both commercial and residential assessments. Okay. So 80% of the assessments in the district are residential, maybe about 20% are commercial when we talk about Lake Forest's assessments in the district. So $3.38 is what it would cost the average taxpayer yearly for that additional penny when we tack that on. Okay, that total school tax that we have right now of $1.61 equates to about 546 for that average annual assessment in the district. And then we look at one of the things we talked about last time also is, well, what does a 1% local pay raise mean? Okay, so as a rule of thumb, the total amount that we pay as a district for the local portion of our salaries is roughly about $10 million. And so when we talk about 1%, that's $100,000. But that's our obligation every year from the district, from our local discretionary budget is we have roughly 10 million that goes just towards local salaries. That's what Dr. Lucas was talking about. You know, when we say about 80% of our budget just goes towards local salaries. So there's that 1% local pay raise. And then what does a $100,000 cost increase to cover that local pay raise? That's about 1.8 cents in tax equivalent. So those are some of the reference numbers as we move forward through this presentation. You want to go ahead and hit the next one. And so here was that one slide that really talked about our district reserve over the past 10 years. And so we can see 10 years ago when we went to referendum back, we actually made that vote in December of 2012, and it took effect in the fiscal year 2014. But you can see, and probably the folks online won't be able to see some of it, but here was where we were up at about 4.5 million in terms of district reserve, and that's when we executed we voted on the referendum. And we had declining reserves at that time. And even despite knowing that we had some big expenses coming on the horizon, even despite increasing that tax by 25 cents, you could still see that the reserves continued to go down for the next 5 years. So to the point where it hit 1.7 million at the low point back in 2017. Now, had it not been for some drastic budget cuts, probably we would have went to an operating referendum back in around 2018. So probably 4 years ago, we probably would have had to go to an operating referendum. But there was some drastic budget cuts. We were able to get up to that 2.5, 2.6, and then all of a sudden COVID hit, and we were fortunate to get all this federal money, the CARES money, which we'll talk about later, and that's allowed us to build up our reserves a little bit more over the past few years. But really, what we're talking about as to why we see what's coming on the horizon, we know that we're going to expect about a 50% increase in transportation costs over a 3-year period. As those driver pays continue to go up, that's a big issue downtown at Legislative Hall and trying to get the bus drivers more pay. The substitute costs. So our Kelly sub costs with the minimum wage legislation that was pressing up against our Class C sub rates. And so as we see the minimum wage continue to go up January 1st each year up through 2025, we're going to see that push those substitute rates up each time, because we can't have our Class C sub rate be below what the minimum wage was. And that's what happened last year until they finally had an emergency session and they passed that through the bond bill to get those sub rates changed. And then the constables in every school, that's going to be a drain on another fiscal pressure that we see coming down the horizon. And then competitive salary pressures, we all are aware of that. So if you want to go ahead and hit the next slide. And so here's where we talk about competitive salary pressures. If you talk about a brand new teacher just coming out of college with a bachelor's degree, these are all the districts that touch Kent County. We're 7th out of the 7 districts. Some of it it doesn't surprise me that much because we do have the lowest tax base of many of districts. So when you talk about a capital, they collect probably for every penny we collect 55,000, they might collect 150,000 or 140,000. So they collect significantly more for each penny compared to us because they have a much more commercial and residential properties up there. So, but this gives you an idea that where we sit amongst the other districts. Once we get into the master's degree with a step 10, we're a little bit more competitive. We're sitting at about 4 amongst the districts. But then as you get further out into, master's plus 45 and a doctorate, then we start to trail behind the other districts again. So you can kind of see where we compare in terms of local salaries. You want to hit the next one? All right. So this was the other slide that we presented at November 30th in discussions of what we thought we could raise or what we thought we would need to raise in terms of additional costs in terms of what we see as the fiscal pressures down the road. So transportation, we anticipate, $150,000 in an increased cost over a 3-year period. The substitute teachers, a similar amount. Technology replacement, now that we've gone to, putting 1-to-1 laptops for all grades instead of just, what was it, 5 through 12 or 6 through 12? So there's the additional cost there for the technology replacement, and then the school constables. If we bear the burden of that completely locally, that would be roughly a little over $400,000 to put a constable in every school. So we were the benefactor of safety and security funding this year. That came through the bond bill. That was about half that amount, $215,000. But that's been very sparse the last couple of years. So we did not receive safety and security money the last 2 years. 3 years ago, we received some, but it was only about a little over $100,000. And the year prior to that was again a little over $100,000. Now they are trying to put that safety and security money. They're trying to at downtown at Legislative Hall, they're trying to push that funding for the school districts, that safety and security funding into the operating bill to make that something that's there every year instead of just a one-time injection of cash, which is what this is right now for our safety and security funds. So we're hoping that if that comes to fruition, there's maybe $200,000 that we could save there in terms of school constables. And anything we save in any of these areas, whether it's transportation, if these costs don't come to fruition like we think they will, that just leaves that much more that we could address for recruiting and retaining quality staff and or pushing the next referendum that much further down the road. Okay. And then I misspoke at the last November 30 meeting. We talked about recruiting and retaining staff, $1.2 million and what that could potentially buy. And there was a discussion about, like a 2% pay raise. And I don't want to get too much into, what individual pay raises were, but there was an insinuation that might represent about 1.2 million. But in reality, a collective 6% pay raise would be, as we saw earlier, when you talk about 1% being $100,000, a collective 6% pay raise would be about $600,000. So really, when we look at 1.2 million, that's collectively 12% above what we currently sit at in terms of pay raises. So, so any amount up to that, you could see, we can use for the future in terms of retaining quality staff. So if you want to go on to the next slide, please. Again, just to go over the different district tax rates and where we sit compared to the other districts. Again, we are the lowest at 161. A lot of that is because we just don't have a lot of construction or renovation projects. Smyrna did recently go through an operating referendum, and you can see that their tax rate is up quite a bit higher. I think they increased theirs roughly about 30 or 35 cents as well. If you want to go on to the next slide. All right, so these were the most frequent responses that we saw in terms of things that we should address at this next meeting. So one of them was the CARES funds, how they've been used, and Dr. Lucas alluded to that. The reassessment, does that mean that we're going to see 2 tax increases? That was one question that I received. And then what about the projects from that 2014 capital referendum? So we'll cover all 3 of these topics in terms of some of the commonly asked questions or concerns. So the first one is our CARES or ESSER funds, the elementary, secondary, emergency response funds. So this came in 3 injections. The first one was only 1.2 million. I talked about that previously, and we used a lot of that for technology. And then we received another one that was about, several months to a year later, that was about 5.6 million, and the last one was 12.6 million. So collectively, the 3 different grants, so to speak, totaled 19.5 million. And you can see the vast majority we have set aside, and we haven't spent all this. This is just where it's been budgeted and or spent, okay? But the vast majority is for school facility improvements and repairs. One of the main things we wanted to do was put new HVAC systems in each of the schools to improve the ventilation and air quality in each of the schools. I mean, we're dealing with very old schools in this district, and we're dealing with old HVAC systems as well. So that was one of our targets with a lot of this funding. But we've used it for various other things, you know, the water bottle filling stations at each of the schools. We had storage issues at each of the schools. We put sheds at each of the schools. One of the things that we budgeted for also is potentially window replacements where we have issues with ventilation. Because they talked about, you know, that was pertinent for trying to, you know, minimize the spread of the virus. So anything we spent on these funds on or budgeted these funds for has to have some sort of nexus to, you know, preparing for and preventing, you know, the spread of the COVID disease. So going back to that school facility repairs though, we look at a lot of that had to be diverted to roofing repairs. And we had submitted a certificate of necessity request to the Department of Education for approximately 5 million of state funds and probably another couple million in local funds to replace several of the roofs in the district that are at critical levels. And we were turned down for that. And one of the things that they mentioned is that we should use our COVID money for this. So some people would say, well, how does repairing roofs have any kind of nexus or relationship to, you know, minimizing the spread of COVID? But they do look at it, some have looked at it as, well, I mean, for instance, at North Elementary, we had a mold problem because of the leaking roofs over there. So we had to address that by replacing the roof there. So that was one of the earlier projects that we had for roof replacements. But a lot of these funds we had to divert basically towards roof replacements. And we were forced to, because we would have liked to put more of it towards HVAC replacements, but now we've kind of had to divert it towards roof replacements in terms of a lot of those funds. The next biggest category is staffing needs at 4.5 million. And so when we talk about, I think we added approximately 5 counselors across the district. That was just one example. And when you talk about a counselor being $75,000 to $100,000 a year from the standpoint of the salary plus the health and the OECs and so forth, the fringe costs, and you count for that over 3 years, you know, you're talking about $250,000 to $300,000 just for one person over a 3-year period. So, and that can quickly add up. But other areas where we added staff, we had to custodians. We had added a couple additional float custodians to address the additional cleaning requirements that we had. We had added an additional nurse due to the stresses that they were going through and all the activities there. The special ed coordinators, that was another big area that we added, paraprofessional support, but there was all sorts of areas that we added staffing needs. And in reality, I mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lucas, I mean, we probably would have loved to have put as much as possible into staffing needs. But the problem is this is 3-year money. And when you put it into staffing needs, at some point, that money is going to go away. And you have to have a transition or an off ramp in terms of what you're going to do with these people then, because now you no longer have these funds coming in. And so you have to have a balancing game between, you know, one-time expenditures that you know that's what these funds are, versus, you know, what the needs are in terms of staff, because we could have loaded up with a lot more staff, but we knew that we didn't want to commit to those type of areas. Technology hardware, 2.7 million. I mentioned it previously. We'd replaced all the smart boards across the entire district with smart TVs to facilitate presentation, remote instruction, things like that. There was a discussion item in the survey, I think, about curriculum too. And so we're making changes to the curriculum. We have almost $2 million put aside and budgeted for curriculum upgrades to include the professional development associated with that to help train the teachers on that new curriculum. So, and then early on, you see things like sanitize and clean and the personal protective equipment. That was stuff that we had to do, the masks, the barriers, things like that. We have, 0.4 up there, which represents 400,000 for communications upgrades. We've got all new radios for all the schools. We're working on new phone systems for all the schools. You saw a new digital sign here across the street at Central, one over at South, to facilitate rapid changes in messaging, things like that. So there's all sorts of things there that are smaller out there that we use these funds for. But this is a combination of what's been spent, but also what's been budgeted. And really, we probably have about half of these funds left, but most of it's been dedicated towards the school facility repairs, roofing replacements, because those are long timelines. You've heard the stories about the supply timelines in terms of getting materials and things like that, and trying to get, you've got every single school district in the states that's trying to, put in new HVAC systems because they've all got this money too. So they're trying to make these kind of facility repairs as well. So any questions about where the CARES money has gone? Okay.
Kurt, how much longer do we have? Can you explain that we only have until, I think, FY 25, December, something like, can you explain that?
Yeah, so when we talk about the funding needs and the personnel we hired, we've got them for this year, and then we've got them for another school year, because then at the end of that next school year is when these funds run out. So it's towards the end of 2024 is when our CARES or ESSER funds run out. So. Yes.
So for those personnel that were added as a result of the strain from COVID, is the hope to continue keeping those FTEs that are funded using CARES, or reallocate them to other roles, or are you hoping that this new increase would continue to fund those positions?
No, I mean, really, I think the plan is to have a transition plan to get them either move to maybe a Division I unit if we earn them. It depends on the schools, and they will tell us their needs. But if they want to keep those people on their staff, they'll let us know. And if it's something where they want to carve out a position for that, they'll look at that. But the intent of the referendum was not to cover these additional personnel that were hired as this process, throughout this process.
So your plan proposes the positions that are currently in place right now, that complement would not be in the
Exactly.
result.
Yeah,
So it'd be less staff than what you have.
exactly. Yeah, as an example, I know all the schools, at least the elementary schools, we had hired cafeteria and playground kind of monitors or para support for during those lunch periods to assist the teachers, so that we take that burden off the teachers and they could more focus on, a little bit more additional instruction and so forth in schools. So that's something that we didn't have before COVID, and it's probably something that, more than likely we won't have after, because we just won't have those funding to be able to pick that up.
But if we're asking for a referendum and we're using those teachers or the staff now, then wouldn't this be the time to try to keep those staff and incorporate it in the referendum request? I'm just trying to, like, what I hear is we need more teachers, or we need more, is it that we don't need more staff and we just need to retain and hire what we have and we can let go of these additional FTEs? Or do we really need more staff and should be strategic about our request and incorporate that increase now if we're going to go to the public and ask for that increase?
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid question. I think in terms of the need, I mean, we definitely need those staff, but it was more of a need from a response to, having, the remote instruction and the loss of learning over the course of, 18, 24 months. So a lot of those positions were to address that loss of learning, or the social, emotional, the mental health, things like that. So we have the added counselors where, it's above what they normally would have had for a counselor contingent staffing level at that school. So I don't know, is there anything else you want
I think ideally what we want to do is anybody is find additional funding sources, right? Either through opportunity funding, which is going to increase over the next few years. We did, there was 2 bills introduced for mental health, House Bill 100, House Bill 300. So many of our mental health providers are shifted over, are going to be funded. And so we're able to take those people that we were funding for COVID, those extra counselors that we hired, and fund them to HB 100, HB 300. So ideally, we're hoping to take the professional staff that we brought on and then slide them into either Division I units or other funding sources. I mean, that's the best case scenario. There are some jobs, like Mr. Kalman mentioned, that we probably will not be able to keep. I mean, it would be great to be able to keep the cafeteria monitors on, but we may not be able to. Teachers may have to go back to, just doing cafeteria duty like we used to do. But our professional staff, our goal is to keep as many of them as we can. And I think we can, seeing as we have a lot of unfilled professional positions in the district. So I don't think there's going to be a problem that we're going to lose position.
Yeah, and I think that's the other challenge we're facing too, is we have lots of needs for staffing. It's just, a lot of times we just can't hire them. There's just not enough people out there to hire. So we have lots of positions posted, but a lot of times it's just trouble, filling those.
Sean, we have a question from someone online. Ms. Thompson, you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of echo what Dr. Lucas had said. I know that, for instance, in the bond bill that's in right now, just came out of committee, there was funding for security in there for schools. It's only $1 million, but it's in there. I don't think that what we're facing is unique to Lake Forest. I think that every school is having issues with being able to address mental health, being able to address the learning loss. So are we engaging with stakeholders as far as our representatives in the government? Because I think as a whole, as the state of Delaware, I think we can find the funding for this. I think we need to engage them to make sure that they understand that this is a need within the district and within the state of Delaware. So I'm kind of echoing what Dr. Lucas said. I think that some of this stuff, if we can engage those people, we funded through the state of Delaware, because I don't see that we're going to be able to get rid of some of these positions that are, that are helping to bring up these kids that had these learning losses, which include my daughter. So I just don't see that that's going to happen. I don't think that's a feasible plan to get rid of some of these positions that are essential, that have helped to bridge that gap, that learning loss gap.
Yeah, and thank you for the response there. Yeah, Dr. Lucas mentioned House Bill 100 and House Bill 300, which were 2 bills that were introduced. Basically, one was for K-5 counselors in mental health, and the other was for the middle school mental health. And what they did was, previously we would have to take our allotment of Division I units, teaching units, and carve out a piece for those counselors. And now they give us a separate state authorization for those counselors. So that's an opportunity there to have maybe some of those positions that we brought on slide in and take up that position that was there before. The other thing that we've alluded to is this opportunity funding. You'll hear it from the Governor Carney, probably with the state of the state, the increase in the opportunity funding. And that's another opportunity, not to make a pun, but that's another opportunity to retain some of those people, because we're going to see an increase in opportunity funding. So that's a possible transition plan for some of these staff that we've brought on. All right, the next issue was the property tax reassessment. So this was originally scheduled to affect our 2024 tax rates. June 1st is the first of that period. I guess from what I've read, it goes from June 1st to the following May in terms of your tax period. And so when they establish new tax rates, it's in effect in June, and then they mail out the bills in August for property taxes. So this whole reassessment was supposed to address the 2024 tax rates. From what I've read, they're a little bit past at the halfway point. I think it's ambitious that they'll be able to affect the 2024 tax rates. I think it might be more like 2025. But really, this all came about because of the fact that our properties haven't been reassessed since, I think it was 1983 for Kent County. And back then it was, the assessment was done basically, I believe it was 60% of the market value of your house. And so when you think about the market value of homes in the district and where they've come in, almost 40 years, I'm sure they're worth quite a bit more than where they were before. But a lot of the reassessment was driven by some of the inequities in the property taxes across the state and the lawsuit against the state. So, but the reassessment itself is supposed to be revenue neutral for the county, okay? And I would imagine it would probably be revenue neutral for the districts as well. And so I have a little bit of an example up here that, and it's fairly close to what we experience in our district. When we talk about a tax rate of $1 per $100 of assessed property value. And with a total assessment of approximately 500 million, which is a little bit under where we are in Lake Forest, but that's pretty close. That means the taxes collected are approximately $5 million. And so that's about where we are. That's a little bit less. We're about 5.4 million in the Lake Forest School District. Okay. But after the reassessment, we're still supposed to only be able to collect $5 million. So if they change your assessed property from all of a sudden from, your house is assessed at $50,000 and now they say it's 150,000. Well, then they would just cut our tax rate by whatever's necessary to make sure that we still continue to earn the same amount of money. So at the end, it's supposed to be revenue neutral. Some people will be winners in this process. Some people will be losers in this process. Probably, I know the folks that they're trying to target, you look up in the Newcastle County area, some of those older homes that were, millions of dollars that were assessed at like $90,000 and they're paying such low property taxes. That was they're going to be a loser in that, definitely, because their property taxes are going to go up. But as a whole, it should be revenue neutral to the district. So when we talk about, going to an operating referendum to try to increase our taxes, we're, as a result of the reassessment, the Lake Forest School District is not going to see any additional tax revenue. Okay. The one caveat I'll throw out there in terms of the reassessment is, I think Kent County has said that even though it's supposed to be revenue neutral, they could collect more with the intent to cover the cost of the reassessment. So it's a minor detail, but that's a way that they could collect more taxes than just being revenue neutral. Any questions about the property tax reassessment? Yes.
Just to be clear, I mean, you say it should be revenue neutral. I mean, we're basically, there's 7 going, right? So the fact that they're saying it's going to be the impact to us with this referendum is we're looking at it as being null, right?
Correct.
We're not worried about that because they are specifically saying it's going to be revenue neutral.
Correct.
Hopefully it turns out to be in that case.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear on the language we're using, that's why we're not really taking it into account, because they are saying it's not happening.
Correct. Thanks. All right, next slide. All right, so this was what was on the ballot at the 2012 operating referendum. And so we faced a lot of the same things back then that we're facing now. This talked about support transportation services necessitated by state budget cuts. Well, back then it was state budget cuts. Now it's increasing costs just because of driver pay, fuel costs, things like that, that we're seeing increased transportation costs. Back then it was attract and retain high quality staff. That continues to be the elephant in the room in terms of operating expenses. We talked about technology replacement, school resource officers back then. Now we're talking about school constables. And then the normal continuing operating expenses of the district. But these were all items that were addressed in the 2012 operating referendum. And some of them are similar in what we're talking about today. So next slide. So now this is a capital referendum, and I want to make sure everybody understands the delineation and the difference between a current expense or an operating referendum and a capital referendum. A capital referendum is for capital projects. It's to raise a fixed amount of money for projects, renovations or school construction or something like that. So when you raise that amount of money, once you spend that amount of money, it's gone. It's gone. So the money from the 2014 capital referendum, the amount of money we raised for all those renovations has already been spent and it's gone. When we talk about a current expense referendum or an operating referendum, we raised that money and now that's our new baseline and we continue to collect that into the future. So here were some of the things that were presented at the capital referendum 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And so the items in green were stuff that we were able to attack. There was a couple items there that we weren't able to. And anytime we go to a capital referendum, one of the things when we start that process and we submit that request to the Department of Education, we always have an ambitious list of what we want to achieve. We always put together a list of more projects than we think we can fund, okay? And so as we get further into that process and we start to get better fidelity on the costs of those projects, each individual project, then you get to see, you know, okay, what's going to stay on the list and what are our priorities in terms of what we want to fund in terms of, you know, renovations or constructions and things like that. So with the issue of the new fencing at Chipman, and there's some other ones that we'll talk, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Because I know the high school was on there as a big benefactor of some of the items. East Elementary relocate the main office, North Elementary, it was the same thing, and also some window replacements. A lot of them had some safety and security issues in terms of the surveillance cameras. And those are all items we achieved. And then go on to the next slide, please. And then here was the high school. We talked about the agriculture, the agri-science classroom building, the entrance canopy to the high school, some roof replacements. The outdoor track, the turf field, the press box. Those are all things that were done with that capital referendum back in 2014. What did we not get to do with those funds? Well, as we started that process, as with anything, you get cost overruns, okay? And so, for instance, when we presented that 8 years ago, 9 years ago, the cost of, let's just say, the track and the turf field together, it was like, I think it was estimated or budgeted at $900,000. When it was all said and done, it was about $1.3 million to do those. So you traditionally get cost overruns when you talk about these capital projects, okay? Some things that we didn't get to attack with that because we ran out of funds, the aquatics locker room upgrade, which we plan to attack with the new state funding that we just received, which is that enhanced minor capital improvement money. So we're going to try to attack some of these projects like the Chipman fencing with this new enhanced minor capital improvement money. The HVAC system for the pool, that's something that we might be able to attack with CARES because it's an HVAC system. That's something else that, you know, we didn't have an HVAC system at the Chipman gym. We're able to do that with the CARES funding. So, and I think one of the things I've kind of heard some contentious discussions about was the field house over at the high school athletic complex there. And so I think originally when that process was set out, they were talking about building a whole new field house. And then when they got into the process and they started doing the engineering and design work, they realized that it was going to be significantly more expensive than they originally planned. So they kind of retreated and they went to renovating the field house. So they expanded the size of the area a little bit and added a new HVAC system there as well. So that was one area where we couldn't really stretch the dollars far enough to attack that project. But there's some of the things that were addressed there and some of the concerns that were brought up with that survey. Next slide. Oh, I think this is that.
Me? All right, thank you.
All right.
All right, we'll have a chance to address questions with Mr. Kellum here before this is over, but I thought it'd be a good chance for us to break up into some groups and do a quick activity before we do something else. So what I'd like you to do in your small groups there, you can stay right where you're at. And if you're listening online, Mr. Mormon's going to put you in breakout rooms here in a second. But we're going to have an activity here where I'd like you to discuss for a few minutes how convinced you are at your own tables that we do need to address this financing within operating referendum, okay? Where are you personally, not as a group, but where are you sitting on a scale of 1 to 10? In terms of, yes, we got to get moving on this, or no, I think we can put this off another year or so. And then if you're not on a number, if you're just like, geez, I just really don't know. I don't feel like I have enough information yet. What information do you need in order to land somewhere? Okay, so I'm going to give you about 10 minutes in your small groups. Individually, after your discussion, I want you to come up with a number. If you can't come up with a number, what is it that you need to know to help you come to a number? All right, does that make sense? Anybody have any questions on that? Now, there's no quiz, there's no test. All right, just an opportunity for you to have a discussion with some other folks from the community. All right, 10 minutes, Travis, put them in breakout groups. Travis, are you able to cut and paste those questions?
PDF.
Oh, let me see if I can.
Very high.
Let me see.
Oh.
Oh, is it working? Yeah.
Anyway, I can't see the second question. You know what the trick is?
Good conversation going on in room one. It took up every minute. Okay, we got everybody back, Travis. All right. Okay, if we could reel it back in. All right. Who still needs more information, or who feels like there's something they just don't know right now? That Mr. Kellerman or I or somebody could, don't be shy.
I think I'm still, I mean, I feel better about it, but I'm still, I don't think we talked about the float. I don't think we got into that, and like with that minimum. Like, what do you feel like you need to address that? And to me, that's an opportunity to utilize this for one-time improvements, right? So it's not gonna fix the salary. It's not gonna fix some of that stuff, but just having a better understanding of where the district feels the float should be on. And then two, I just wasn't clear on that chart where it had the itemized list of how the funding increase would be distributed. Is that like a 1 year reflection of how the increase would be, or is that like a 5 year? Like, what is that number? What are those, where does that break down?
Travis, could you go back to that, it's the grid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, take a look at that real quick. Is that me with the in the way here? Okay. It's the one, it's one of Kurt's slides,
Don't worry.
and I will try to explain it. What I can't explain, Mr. Kellerman will explain. Right there, next one.
Go down.
Yeah, next one. Yeah, this one, right? Okay, so what this would represent, okay, would be a total of a 12% salary increase, right? Now, that doesn't mean like 12% in 1 year, or 12% this year, 12% next year, 12% a year. That would mean a aggregate increase of up to 12%, right? Like, just for the sake of argument, we did 5% this year, 4% next year, that would be 9%, 3% the year after that, that's 12%. We're at the limit, right? That's what that 1.2 million represents. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. 150,000 is an estimate of potentially what the increase in transportation costs could be every year. Correct? Same thing with our substitute teacher costs. And our school safety, the cost of all the constables collectively, if we had one in every school, without any support from the state, additional resources, would be $434,000, completely against local funding, for a total of about $2 million a year, which equates to about 36-cent tax increase. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I guess what I'm hearing you say is that at your baseline, let's say your budget is $10 million, that you're gonna add 150,000 to that for transportation alone, $150,000 to cover the transportation need. And that would be, it would raise your baseline from 10 million to 10,150, covering and that would be your baseline every year. But then with your salaries or your retaining and recruiting, you're saying that's 1.2 over several years. So kind of like that 2 million isn't really reflective of a 1 year increase. It's mixed
Yes,
up.
you're right. I get where you're going with that. And let's say that our increase to salaries is only 500,000. Then when the tax rate is set by the board, they don't set this tax rate. They set the tax rate that they feel they need to set so that we have a balanced budget. Does that make sense? So if the first year the salary increases are only 500,000. That means that we still have room. Remember, we want this referendum to last through like, 2 negotiations, like at least 6 years. We want to be able to sustain, just like the last one did, 8, 10 years if we can. So I assume we're fiscally prudent enough to know we can't go right out of the gate and give that big chunk of salary. So that's a good point. This is the ultimate, like, top end, right? We don't have to go right there off the top.
But it's not, because I don't know what that 1.2 is, how many years that is. And then let's say that was for 5 years, then you should have transportation costs that show
No.
500.
This is 1.2 every year.
Okay,
Yeah, every year, these costs are gonna be incurred every year. Yeah, and we can expect that this 1.2, that's gonna be resolved through negotiations. Transportation, substitute teachers, technology, those are there. They are not going away. Safety constables, our community has voiced that that's not going away.
right.
This is going to be negotiated and it's going to be based on what. You want Earl, go ahead.
I think I agree with Stephanie said, I want to clarify, so. The 1.2 million represents a 12% increase.
Yes, sir.
So if we were to increase salaries 12% this year, for the next 6 years, we would have 2,054,000 increase. in
Yes, sir.
budget every year.
Yes, sir.
If we were to increase 2% every year for the 6 years,
Yes,
2% this year, 2% next year, right? We wouldn't need that full 2 million until year 6.
correct.
Correct.
Yes,
So
sir.
in year 2, we would need 200,000 of that 1.2. Year 2, 400,000, 6, 8, up to the 1.2. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if that was the rate that was set, the 36.97, my question is, does that become the rate year 1 and stay that way for 6 years? Or we have the ability to set the rate up to that amount? And we only set it at what we need for that particular year.
Yeah, so we have what this effectively does is you would vote to determine what that tax rate cap should be. So if you say that we can go up to, let's say in this situation, 36 cents, then that would become the new cap. You would add that to that 0.995 or 95 cents. So 95 cents plus the 36 cents would become your new cap. And then we would determine through the referendum vote, how we would want that cap to get implemented. So you could say, I want to spread this over 4 years. So let's say 36 cents over 4 years, 9 cents, a year. So then the first year I can go up 9 cents on my property tax. The next year I can go another 9 cents to the point where I get to that 36-cent increase. And then at that point, now we're collecting that additional. So initially, we wouldn't be collecting 2 million right out the gate.
So my question then is, when this goes into effect, do those benchmark rate increases, are those outlined from the start? Or is it an annual decision?
No, those are usually they're outlined from the start.
Okay. Because again, my understanding is we set what? 3 or 4 tax rates each year.
Correct,
The one we don't touch is this one.
correct.
Okay, so we would say we anticipate this lasting 6 years, and year 1 it would be this, year 2 would be this, year 3 and so on. And that would be promulgated out to everyone.
Correct.
Kurt, do you remember that 25-cent tax increase from 2000, do you remember how we spaced that out?
That was spread, the one back from the 2012 operating referendum, it was 25 cents, and I believe the majority was up front the very first year. I think, it was front end loaded, and then it was a smaller increase in year 2, and then a smaller increase in year 3. So I've seen it done different ways. I think the Smyrna one, I think it was all front ended. I think Capital's going through a current expense increase each year. And they've just got an equal amount that they're going up each year. It was, maybe like 4 cents or 2 cents or something like that, so. But it just depends on how you want to implement that. And that's a decision to make.
I'm trying to understand what you're asking and the way that it's being explained, so I'm gonna ask this question to see if it helps any. So, essentially, that 1.2, is that kind of securing the 12% raise over the course of however long, 6 years, 8 years, whatever the board determines, whatever the annual raise is going to be for staff across the board, securing it in place until we deplete that 12% and then just go, step matrix increase with that, or another referendum or something of that nature.
So that 1.2 is it's basically our commitment to say, let's commit 1.2 of this tax increase to salary increases over
X amount
several
of
years, X number of years. Now, do we have to rely strictly on this? No, that's one of the reasons we have a reserve too, is we can use part of that reserve to address some of those increases as well. So we're not confined to just using the tax increase here. We also have our district reserve to rely upon for addressing the salary needs as well. Does that make sense?
Kind of like saving it, right?
What's that?
Kind of like saving it.
Yeah.
One question we didn't answer, and I want to make sure we do, is that, like, how much is that district reserve? Do we want to, we're at 3.6 right now. So Kurt, like, what is the industry standard, or what is the minimum, legal minimum? How much do we have to have in that district reserve?
Yeah, and actually, just to correct, I think we're about 3.8 right now, but this past year with 3.8 million. The number that's continuously thrown out there is about 5% of your total budget of all expenses. And so if we're at, if you use 50 million, we're a little bit higher than that, actually. We're probably about 55, but at 50 million, that's about 2.5 million. So that would be a district reserve. And we wouldn't want to go below that. Another way to look at this too is we have all these teachers on contracts for a 12-month period. And so when we pay them into the new fiscal year as well. We pay them over 26 months. So you're getting paid over the summer, even though you're not working then, because we spread out your payments over 26 pays. So as we start the new fiscal year, we still have that commitment to finish out that contract until the next school year begins in September. So we've got July and August payments of salary to cover that commitment, that obligation that we have for the local salaries. And so that alone, you're talking, about $1.5 million to 2 million right there, just to cover those local obligations. So that's at a bare bones minimum. So when we talk about, getting below that level, that gets kind of dangerous, in my opinion. So, but anything above 2.5, we look at as that gives us some breathing room, the ability to, maybe we have an emergency, fix that our minor capital improvement funds are not enough to cover. If we had a major, roof issue or something like that, or repairs. We do get those occasionally. And this past year, we had some emergency repairs that basically ate up almost all of our minor capital improvement money before coming up on towards the end of the year. So, there's things like that, rainy day, that you also want to address as well, that you want to have that district reserve. But that does give you some breathing room too, in terms of salary negotiations as well, that district reserve. And then you had a.
Yes, we had somebody raise their hand online. Squilly, did you still have a question or a comment?
Yes, sorry. So how is this prioritized? Are these our priorities, the way this is laid out on the screen, transportation, subs, et cetera, because to some of the comments at the beginning that you said you received from the survey was that things we said that we were going to do in the 14 referendum, we didn't do. And then you showed the screen with everything in green, we did, everything in red, we didn't do. How is this prioritized? And you had just mentioned, whoever was speaking, that some of this is, their estimates, transportation estimates, fuel estimates. There'll be negotiations with staff on XYZ. When there's excess funds, or when we're trying to determine how we spend this referendum money, how is this prioritized so we don't end up with the same feedback of, well, you said you were going to do these 5 things here and you didn't?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In terms of priorities, priorities are what we have to spend, have to be at the top of the list. So we have to pay our budget every year. Whatever our expenses are, we have to meet that. So kids have to get transported to school every day, so when those costs go up, we have to either pay them outright based on the revenues we have, or we have to go into deficit to pay them. So I guess the answer is, you know, all of those things are the purpose, the reason behind promoting or initiating this tax increase is because we need all of those things. But I guess I don't have any other way to put it other than they all have essentially equal value. The one thing that is negotiable is salaries, but I know that we are committed to funding salaries at the highest possible rate that we can afford here in the district. I don't want to speak for the board on that, but I'm confident that that is the attitude of the board and administration, that salaries are important, but certainly those are negotiable. And, you know, we have to stay within the confines of our budget. But some things, some expenses, we just have to pay it. Transportation, we have to pay it. Substitute teachers, we have to pay it. We just don't have any option. So many of these things that are listed in the referendum are just the cost of doing business. I don't know. I said a lot to say a little, Mrs. Willie. I don't know if that helps.
So then is the way it's laid out, school safety constables, that would be the last thing that as far as priorities?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're committed to getting to one constable in every school. It's just a matter of how are we going to get it? How are we going to be able to fund that? So it's not any less important to us than our technology replacement, our transportation, or our salaries for our employees.
Okay, I appreciate it, Dr. Lewis. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, really, some areas have more flexibility than others. I mean, technology, I mean, if we were forced to, I mean, maybe instead of a 5-year replacement cycle, we'd have to go to a 6 or something like that. You know, even though we don't want to. But you know, there's things like that you have some flexibility with. But yeah, like Dr. Lucas said, I mean, when the state raises the driver rate for the bus drivers, we don't have any say in that. So now we have to pay that increased cost. That's the cost of doing business. But and the only other thing I'll point out is when we talk about a capital referendum versus an operating referendum and priorities, it's a little bit different when we talk priorities, because in a capital referendum, you know, you only have a fixed amount of money. We have this amount of money that we're trying to raise, but we also have our district reserve. So there's, you know, that flexibility there to work with, not just what we continue to increase in terms of our tax rate, but also our district reserve that we have to work with. So there's a little bit more flexibility there to address our priorities.
Chief?
One of the concerns I have, and I know this meeting is focusing on the operating referendum, but where do we stand with the capital referendum? What are the costs? Are we looking at that? What fiscal year are we looking to project that out? Because that plays into the taxpayer paying these increases.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah. To this point, our debt service, our payment of these 20-year construction bonds, for instance, from that 2014 referendum, they continue to get smaller and smaller each year. So our debt service cost to the district continues to get smaller and smaller each year until we are forced to go to another capital referendum and do some major project. Right now, we don't, with all this CARES funds that we have, we probably would have had to go to a capital referendum for all these roof replacements. But that's allowed us to, you know, avoid having to do a capital referendum. Being able to tack roof replacements, you know, HVAC replacements, you know, when you talk about major capital expenditures in schools, those are the biggest things that, you know, cost the most amount of money in schools is the roofs and the HVAC systems. And so with all this CARES funds, that's kind of helped us dodge a bullet there in terms of, you know, capital referendum. So really, in terms of the future projection for capital referendums, it's really up to the community. I mean, do you want to see a new school somewhere? I mean, that's up to the community. Or if, you know, if we face some sort of enrollment increases at a certain school where we're outgrowing the size of that school. For instance, let's say if some of these community plans to boost up Frederica, you know, come to fruition, and all of a sudden that starts to explode, you know, then they're probably going to outgrow East Elementary. So then, you know, That's just a possibility, you know, in the future. But right now, there's nothing on the immediate horizon because this CARES fund has really helped us out before.
And our buildings are old, but we feel really good about the health of those buildings. And frankly, the state's not really approving any new major construction projects unless it's for growth. So unless we outgrow our buildings, it's gonna be unlikely that we're gonna be able to get any support from them, which means if we were to want to build a new school, for example, we'd be on the hook for the entire cost. So, yes, sir.
What is your timeline? What really realistically are you looking at as to where you're gonna run this referendum? May, this year, next year, 3 years? And I only say that because gasoline is going up 33%. My food is going up 25%. And we're looking at going for 37 cents. You've got many low-income families in the Lake Forest School District that you're gonna have a hell of a way of trying to sell it to them. Because I remember when we ran one back then, the same questions are today as they were 20 years ago. You're gonna have the people in the senior centers coming out of the woodwork. You're gonna have the farmers coming out of the woodwork. You're gonna have all these peripheral people that are going to say, look, I'm more concerned about my household than I am about your school system. And when you look at that amount of money, 37 cents, is $124 per year per household. And this is minimal. So when we get down to the brass tacks of things, it's selling it to the community. It's not selling it to us. It's selling it to the community. That neighbor that's sitting beside you in a house that's assessed at $20,000, not 50, 20. So those are the real issues that I know that throw up a red flag to me. And yes, it would be nice to have a capital improvement referendum as well. But you gotta bite off one, and that's right now is the operating expense. You can't let the school district go under. So, you know, when they see 1,200,000, whatever it is, for teacher salary, whoa, they already got enough, you know? That's the mentality that we're gonna be faced with. It's gonna be extreme difficult.
Oh, I understand. It's just, you know, the flip side of that coin is if we don't do some of these things, we won't have teachers. And so then you won't have a community anymore. So, you know, there's tough decisions to make there, yeah.
I just wanna, tag off of what Mr. Seiler's saying. This is gonna be that much more difficult because the governor just put out that he wants to do a 9% increase to teacher salaries. And so you're gonna have our community saying, the teachers are already gonna get a 9%. And of course, this is what he'd like to have, not necessarily what's gonna happen, but a 9% increase in teacher salaries. And then you're gonna tell the community, oh, and we wanna do a referendum so the teachers can get up to a 12%. So I think the timing and the messaging is gonna be very important to be strategic about, because that 9% has to be communicated, that that'll increase the baseline for teachers across the state and will not put Lake Forest at a level of competition with other salaries, but that's not what the community will hear, right? So we have to be very careful if this is the time that we want to do it, that we get that we make that clarification. And I think it's also important to try to articulate what the plan is, like how long this will last. So is this 3 years? Is this a 5-year plan? Like, what does this look like? Because people are gonna be looking, just like we did, to say, well, you were here in 2012 and asked me, what did you do with it then? You know, you were here. So how long do we project that this will last before you come back to say, we need another increase? Like, I get that operating expenses increase every year, but not the everyday person doesn't understand that.
Yeah, I think the other challenge is like you say, a lot of people don't realize that, you know, when Governor Carney talks about a 9% increase, like you say, it is on the state side. And that's only 70% of the teacher's salary. We have to pick up that other 30% of the salary. And so when we talk about increasing salaries, we're only affecting 30% of the teacher's salary. So when we talk about our percentage increases, you know, we're trying to do what we can from our side, but it's really the state's share that's the biggest portion. Our share is just what makes us competitive across other districts. So that is a challenge there. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think, Travis, go back one slide. I think, and I totally understand. I mean, that's why we need to have an outreach team that is able to reach out and get these messages to every member of the community, but the 9% raise, first off, it's only for school-based people. So many of our employees aren't in the classroom and still, you know, are not going to recognize that 9% raise. And that's still going to keep us 7.4, 7.6, because that 9% is going to be the state portion. So I think, yeah, I think when we get a little bit more clarification on that, because again, it's kind of on the governor's dream sheet. I think we'll be able to sort of effectively address that. Those are great points, and we understand what we're up against. Any other questions, Travis? Any other questions? Because I know you've been here a long time, and we can always come back. Okay, I wanted to do part two. Can you, so everybody's got a dot on their table. And I'm not, again, nobody's going to be graded on this or held accountable. So throughout the room, you can see some different tax scenarios. Scenario one right over there, if you feel like the community is just not ready for this, that everybody's under too much pressure, that this is not the right time, I need you to put your dot there. Scenario two represents the cost of a 20% tax increase from our current rate of 0.9508 to 11508. That costs the average taxpayer is about $67 a year, $5 a month. And that could potentially support a 7% salary increase total, right, over the aggregate. So 322, something like that. That would cover the transportation and technology needs, but not all the constables. So that's scenario two. Scenario three, same thing, 25-cent tax increase. Scenario four is a 30-cent tax increase. And then scenario five, right here, that's the one that was presented at 3607, 3697 tax increase. What I'd like you to do is independent thought here, take a dot from your list of dots and put it where you think you feel like we could potentially get the community to support. Okay, as a committee, let me rephrase that. As a committee, what do we want to recommend to the Board of Education? Because it's ultimately up to the board. All right, so put your dot where you think we should make our recommendation to the board. If you're online, people use the online poll, the Google form. Travis shared it with you.
Where do people are split? Do they use 2 dots or do they just?
One dot, you only get one dot.
Yeah.
All right, Travis, are you on? Click me to the next screen.
I'm trying to look back into the chat. Yes, sir.
I feel like this is mine.
Same message.
Okay, tell mom, I'll send it back out in the morning. I'll figure it out. Okay, folks, I just wanted to wrap up, summarize a little bit. Mr. Soler mentioned, May referendum vote, just wanted to put that scenario into your heads. If that were the case, we would have to notify the election board here real soon. Board would have to approve it by February 8th. We would run our outreach campaign March through May. Election day would be May 6th to coincide with Battle of Lake Forest Day. The wild card about that whole scenario is school board elections are already scheduled for May 9th. Now, the election committee is telling us that's not a problem, but, you know, I mean, we'll have to discuss that if we really believe that's not a problem. So again, we'll present these findings to the board. The board will vote to proceed or not. It'll be their call. Once if they do vote to proceed, we got to notify the election board, and the real work comes with these subcommittees and the outreach committee and the admin committee, right? We gotta dot all our i's, cross all our t's with the administrative part. And then we got to get out and we got to talk to our stakeholders. So that's going to require a lot of work, a lot of phone calls, a lot of presentations at all the schools, maybe the firehouse, the lodge, places like that, to where we can get that clear message out that you all were talking about. The next meeting of this group right here, all of us, is going to be determined based on what happens next with the decisions of the board. Here's what we need from you for now, is to share this work with your contacts, with your colleagues, with your community members. If they have any questions, they can reach out to me, to Mr. Kellerman, any of us. I mean, they all just call the school district if they want any information. All of this information is also housed on our website. So this presentation, any of the work that we're doing, we're trying to make it public and completely out there for anybody to see. Actively sign up for one of the subcommittees. It's going to be a big part of this. And then on election day, get out there and vote and bring 5 of your friends. If every one of us votes and gets 5 people to come vote, we should be able to get this thing passed. I think the vote in 2014, there were 1,400 total votes. So, you know, we do the math, we can get it done. What was that? You know, we only need one more. Okay, all right, folks, I know it's been long. I didn't intend to keep you this long. And I really appreciate this. I'll send out further communications. I'm gonna stay. If anybody wants to stay, I'm gonna stay. Mr. Kellner will be here for a few more minutes. Thank you very much for your investment in time, and you'll be hearing from us. Thanks.
Is this recorded?
We'll put the recording on the website. Thanks.